Hi, folks. My name is Niall Richard Murphy. I do SRE consulting at site reliabilityengineering.info, and my session is called SLOs for VPs, what they give you, what they cost. So for the VP in your life, maybe you're the VP, maybe you are showing this to somebody who is. Doesn't matter whether you're in eng or sales or whatever. I suppose, congratulations, you're a VP, but your world probably looks something like the following. You are asked to make decisions constantly, often very quickly, often without much context, and you serve from cache a lot. And by this, I mean that you have various mental models of situations that you have encountered throughout the years. You know how to resolve those situations or move forward successfully in those situations. And one of the main functions of your job is to figure out what you're coming across in reality, match that against your models, and figure out the right thing to do to make progress quickly. You probably know your thing in detail. Hard to be a VP without that, I suppose. You probably don't know everything. You probably have an array of stakeholders you interact with and balance between. There's many conflicts around, particularly underneath you, probably with other people in the stakeholder array. Or to put it another way, you are assailed tactically, but you are rewarded strategically. So your ability to actually pilot the org is part of your job, or your necessity to pilot your org is part of your job. But there's a lot of kind of day-to-day stuff that might interfere with that. So actually, we have a tool for you. We have an approach that will allow you to manage the services and the systems that happen to be in your scope and make good decisions about them and figure out what's going on about them. And that tool is SLOs, or service level objectives. Now, probably the closest analog to this that you will have come across before is this thing called KPIs, key performance indicators. And they are, just rehearsing the basics, numbers that tell you the state of things that you care about. They can be more or less concrete or abstract. Some example ones that you probably are pretty familiar with is stuff like market share percentage, the sales cycle length, i.e. how long it takes to actually complete a sale from time of introduction to customer to actual signing of check, or the time from thinking of a feature in the software that you're responsible for to it actually making its way out to production, and so on. You, in other words, monitor the current state of affairs and you influence the future state, often by picking some kind of new target percentage for market share or attempt to shrink the sales cycle length, etc. Now, SLOs, it turns out, are actually just like KPIs, except that they're supposed to be, I mean, sometimes this requires some iteration, but they're supposed to be connected directly to the user experience, right? Which means that you have to pick a good proxy, a good signifier of the user experience for the service that you're responsible for. Another way to think of SLOs in the context of KPIs is that they're a way to understand what's going on with your production systems in a single number. Of course, it's not just a single number, it's the metric in question, which can be more or less complicated to decide, but you're really focusing, you're hiding a lot of detail underneath this metric number combination. And something that's absolutely key, it's also a way to express an availability ambition for a service, which is some acknowledgement that the user experience should be thoughtfully decided on by your org rather than just kind of randomly fallen into. So rehearsing this, SLO, standing for service level objective, is a target for a service. SLI is a service level indicator, which is a metric inside a service. And SLA is an agreement, which is customer facing contract. Usually there's a clause in it if the SLO is breached, which involves some compensation. Coming back to the question of availability ambition, I've talked about VPs being able to set a number, meaning, oh yes, we would like this service to be X% available. Obviously, many VPs would say, well, I'll make that number 100%. I mean, what's the downside? And I'll just set it to 100% for everything. Well, it turns out there are various reasons not to do this. It is generally understood. We don't really have time to go into anything in more detail here, but generally understood that 100% is very expensive, if not actively impossible. And there is definitely a point of diminishing returns. More effort will not produce linear amounts. Linear effort will not produce linear amounts of improved availability. Indeed, most users, because the availability of consumer-grade internet hardware is about 99%, most users can't really ever tell the difference between 100% and 99%. But probably most crucially, from the point of view of somebody who's trying to steer an organization, if you insist on 100% targets for that organization with respect to availability in a service, they actually can't do anything other than react. Every time a tiny thing goes wrong, your org will end up spending attention unwisely, and it won't be able to make tomorrow better than today is. So a less than 100% target allows your org to be a shock absorber rather than rigidly coupled to the actions of this service. Now, what do SLOs give you? I suppose a way to stop drowning in some sense, particularly if you're trapped in a very strongly reactive kind of context. It also gives you a way to prioritize internal organization effort. Okay, this service is a 5.9 service. This service is a 2.9 service. We therefore know to spend the time on this rather than this if they're both in trouble, or if this one is in trouble and this one is fine, we spend it over here. And we do that rather than a time-based allocation. Okay, spend 20% of your time on this and 80% of your time on this, because the thing that matters with SLOs is the user experience. So you're structuring your effort based on the effect it will have on the user and not necessarily on how people spend their time inside your organization, which is ultimately not necessarily a thing which is strongly coupled to customer experience output. It also gives you a way to communicate externally about your priorities, not just the 5.9 service versus the 2.9 service example that we were talking about earlier, but also the idea that we are explicitly saying this service is going to operate in this way. And if you are going to rely on it, you need to be aware of how we're going to work when we are in charge of this service and how we're going to respond when there's problems with it. Or ultimately, it's basically an easier and faster way to summarize a lot of complicated detail in a quite compact way. And if you are a little bit like the configuration of VP I was talking about earlier in this session, then you will very much appreciate the ability to model something concisely and respond in a reasonable way given a set of conditions. Now, what do they cost? I suppose the largest, most fundamental thing is the time and effort to get the org to think this way, to actually choose these metrics. It's not a trivial job. Like it can often take, 6 months, 12 months or thereabouts in order to pick exactly the right ones for sufficiently complicated applications. But other than that, not that much, actually. Probably tooling costs. You might write your own or you might purchase from elsewhere. But ultimately, that's really the trade-off. Time and effort to understand your systems, explicitly select the user behavior, and track and monitor that on a KPI style basis. I think it really makes sense as a way to understand the world. And I hope that you, the VP or the VP's friend, get a lot out of this presentation. Thank you very much.